Welcome to the NSI podcast. I am your co-host, Cassie Dinsmore. We have Dr. David O'Gwen, our Director of Cybersecurity, on the podcast to discuss AI-driven cybersecurity threats that are evolving rapidly with deepfake content.
All right, listeners, thank you for joining us today. We have with us Dr. David O'Gwen. He's the Director of Enterprise Cybersecurity at Next Step Innovation. And just a little bit about David, if you don't mind me calling you David. He was a research assistant at, will do, sir, research assistant at the University of Alabama, at Birmingham, and at Mississippi State University. He has been a researcher at Lincoln Labs up at MIT, where he worked on cyber systems and operations groups aiding the U.S. Department of Defense. He was also reestablished the computer science program and prepared students for work in the real world when he was at Belhaven University as a professor. Dr. O'Gwen, thank you so much for being on our show today.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me.
And Rich was touching on the Lincoln Labs, and didn't you have two publications while you were there?
I had a few publications. Most of the work that I did there fell into two camps. The first was some of the work I was doing with so-called big data, right? When I was hired at Lincoln, I was hired to be a visualization guy. So my PhD was within the graphics lab at UAB. So my advisor was a graphics researcher, right? His work was primarily within the areas of doing visualization of biological systems, and so I was trained in that area. So I was more of a graphics guy. And when I went to Lincoln, that was what I was going to do. Well, the problem with visualization is that you have to have data to visualize. And in the area of cybersecurity, or at least in the area of information security, a lot of times the data that you're talking about is very large data. It's not necessarily Google large, right? But it is pretty large. And what's worse is that the data that you deal with a lot of times has to have varying levels of visibility to it, meaning that there are some things in the data that you should be able to see, that any analyst should be able to see, but there are some things in the data, especially when you're talking about the Department of Defense, and even on cleared systems, there's some parts of the data that may have data in it that you want to limit to only certain people. And so some of the research I was doing at Lincoln had to do with a particular way of storing lots of data in a way that for every observation that you would store, certain parts of the observation anyone could see, and other parts of the observation information only some people could see. And the name of the system was called Accumulo, and it was built on top of a whole system called Hadoop, and it was based on Google and yada yada. But the NSA had come up with this way of storing data specifically to solve the problem of visibility. And right, so some of the work that I was doing when I first got there, once I had to solve the problem of getting the data into a form that I could pull it out and visualize it, that was with this Accumulo system. And so I have a few papers that I was involved with in producing results, input rates and things like that, some of the low level, how fast can you shove it into that database and stuff like that. But the other kind of research that I did was working with the group at Lincoln that was tasked with building a sort of a laboratory of data based on Lincoln's own data, meaning that it was supposed to be a research environment for cybersecurity researchers that was pulling in all the data from Lincoln Laboratory itself, at least the data that was okay for researchers to have. And so it was called the Lincoln Research Network Operations Center, or LRNOC. And so what we were doing is we were pulling all the data in, we were saving it in a certain way so that researchers could come in and do research on it. And then our results sort of centered around that data set that we were maintaining, both in terms of visualization and otherwise. So those were the papers that I tended to publish, one of those two things. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Well, today I thought we would talk about the popular subject of AI-driven cybersecurity threats that are currently going on. So we had a few questions around that, and we wanted to pick your brain about what your thoughts were on that.
I'll
So,
do my best.
Well, I mean, it's kind of fun, and you and I have talked about this, David. We've talked about AI before, and
Yeah.
AI is almost like cloud was 10 years ago. Everyone used the word cloud in front of
Yeah.
everything, didn't really know what it meant, and we always. I think one of my favorite jokes is if you say AI 3 times in front of a mirror, a Terminator shows up behind you. So it's kind of the world we're living in
Yeah.
right now. But
Right.
to Cassie's point, one of the big questions we've been hearing a lot about is AI, but also security and how AI can aid and abet bad actors. So kind of one of the first topics we wanted to kind of drive into and get your thoughts on was AI-driven social engineering. I know that you run a pretty good red team there, here at Next Step. And, one of the ways that if we have to get in someplace, social engineering is always going to be our best bet, right? Like that's the easiest way. There's other ways that you do it, and there's things that your team does that's pretty amazing. But social engineering is such an easy way and technique for people to get into someone else's infrastructure, right? But now you have AI-driven social engineering. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Goodness, yeah. I'll broach a few things that are on my mind about that. So one of the primary things that you have to do when you're doing social engineering is you have to put the person that you're talking to that has some level of authority that you're trying to gain. You have to put that person into a situation where it's easier for them or more tolerable for them to give you what you want than to tell you no, right? And in the past, the way that would work out is that you would put them in a situation where it was high pressure, right? You would give them an email. So the classic example is you send an email from the CFO that says, the CIO you send this email to somebody who has the ability to wire funds, maybe somebody higher up. You send an email from someone that says the CEO says that we're in China right now, and you have to wire these funds over here so that we can finish a deal, right? And maybe they've done enough research with that organization where everyone in the organization knows that the CEO and the CFO and so forth are all in China right now trying to get a deal. Maybe they've done that research and they know that that's the case. Well, you send the email right at that time to somebody. Even better, you send it to them when they are at their daughter's play or something like that. You put them in a situation where, oh my gosh, it's the CEO or the CFO. They're telling me to do this. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Well, it's just easier for them. Okay, well, I'll wire the funds, right? And so that's normally in the past how you would do social engineering, right? And it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. This is the high pressure job, right? This is how you con people generally, the old school confidence game. Well, with AI, we're entering into a new phase where you don't necessarily have to do that. And the primary example of this would be using something like phishing or voice phishing, right? Where let's say somebody wants to get into our company, right? What do they have to do? Well, you're the COO of this company, right? I'm the director of cybersecurity of this company. We are talking currently on a podcast that's publicly available. Someone can take this podcast and my voice or your voice and create a model of our voice such that they can type whatever they want and it sounds just like us. It sounds just like us. And you don't even, it's gotten to the point now where you don't even need much more than say 30 seconds worth of audio, right? And so if you have a large corpus of audio, you can make the voice sound exactly like that person, even with their weird inflections and things like that. So what does that mean? That means that you don't even have to pressure them.
Yeah.
You just have to call them and give them a plausible explanation, and they hear the voice of someone that they know, and that is the verification to them, right? And so that's one example. And of course, everyone knows about, or people are learning about deepfakes, which is the concept of producing video that looks like people. The problem with the deepfakes is that it's a way easier for us to most people I know can look at a deepfake and say that's probably a deepfake, right?
Right.
But with audio, not as much. And if you take that same trick with the audio model and you put a little bit of pressure into it, you're home free.
Yeah.
We're entering into a very dangerous time. Very dangerous time.
Well, I mean, just take phishing, for example. I mean, what would you say is probably what's our success rate, and that you've seen just for phishing, getting someone to click on something?
That's something that has gotten better over time. It has, in fact, gotten better. A lot of organizations, strangely enough, or maybe not strangely enough, some of the best organizations out there are going to be educational and or even some K-12s have gotten very good at this because people have been undergoing training for phishing for some time. So over time, as I've been here, those results have gotten better and better and better in sense of what people are doing. But the issue is currently, and this is what we're seeing, is that people are becoming very highly attuned to pattern matching on very high risk credential exposure. So in other words, your credentials for the organization, right? They are very highly attuned to that. So if you give them something that says like an Office 365 phish, they get that, and you tell them that, well, there's been a problem, you have to give us your credentials. People tend to click on that pretty well. They've gotten a lot better at that.
Right.
So instead, what you do is you go sideways, right? Rather than going for the credentials of the origin organization, you go for something else, like a social media account, something like that, or their email or something like that, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that, and kind of working for a cybersecurity company like we do, first of all, it's bred a lot of paranoia in me. If I'm being very honest, like I'm like everything's trying to get me. But when going back to the phishing thing, I've been able to, and maybe it's because I've been trained by you and others, the things to pick out, and there's certain things that I've been able to see in the past for emails, but it's whether it's a grammatical or the way that they, it's not just the Prince of Ethiopia is trying to get me to help him bring money over to the U.S. And even some of the way they were masking their, who the email address is coming from. But now, there's a lot of AI building some of these new phishing emails. And I got to tell you, some of the ones that we've seen lately have been excellent. I don't know if you want to talk about some of those, or maybe some of the ways to pick out in an email, even with these AI developed emails. What are some of the things we should be looking for?
I think the primary thing that we still want to look for in any phishing email, whether it's AI generated or otherwise, is the pressure coefficient, meaning how much pressure is this email putting on you? Any email that you get that puts any level of pressure on you should immediately raise your hackles. If you feel pressured by an email, I don't care who it is, who actually sent it. Maybe the CEO actually did send it. But if that email puts pressure on you, your spidey sense should immediately go, whoa, like this, and say, okay, wait a minute. And if there's pressure coming from the email, your first reaction should be to contact the person that you think is trying to get in touch with you and say, did you send this? Right?
Right.
Meaning that you go through your own known communication channels with whoever this thing is that's sending you this. You go through your known communication channels and you contact them. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say, and this is just more of a comment, less of advice, but it's the worst part about AI currently is that in the past you had people people composing these emails who their first language was not English, right? So it made things a lot easier on you. Now these same people simply use large language models to produce emails that have a
Right.
point and that comes out as
Yeah.
perfectly legible English, right? So we can no longer use some of those heuristics anymore where you see the misspelled word or anything like that. And if there's even one of the things that these LLMs are giving to you is the ability to basically tell the LLM, I've never tried this, but it seems plausible that you could go, if not beyond, at least all the way up to, please compose a spear phishing email for this person in this company, and the AI will actually produce a spear phishing email for you, right? It will go out into its data and produce information that's particular to that person that would be plausible enough for that person to swallow, right? I imagine there are guardrails for that so that if you use the wrong keywords, like give me a spear phishing email, right? They'll probably
Sure.
say,
Yeah.
no, I can't do that. But you could probably get close enough, right? And that's the
Right.
other aspect of it, is that spear phishing used to be something that was a lot more difficult, right? You had to actually do the open source intelligence to figure out, okay, for this person, these are the things that are important. So if I want to send a spearfish directly to that person, I had to do the background work to be able to compose that thing, right?
Yep.
And with AI, that's made a whole lot easier, a whole
Yeah.
lot
It
easier.
really
So it's
has.
really more a matter of volume than it is quality of the individual email, right? It's the fact that more people are now capable of doing, people who otherwise wouldn't have the ability, now they do,
Mhm.
right?
Yep. That makes sense. Well, I appreciate you answering that.
And we touched on the fake content, the deep fakes, but I had a question about that. How is deep fake technology changing the landscape of phishing, fraud, and cybercrime? Like,
Yeah. I think in terms of fraud, um, this is not necessarily my background. I'm more in the social engineering side of things and the cybersecurity side of things. But I think one of the primary things that can happen within the area of, say, finance, is that you can very easily see a situation where something can be content can be generated using deep fakes, using artificial intelligence, that at the wrong moment uh, can cause a panic, right? Can cause something to happen in the market or something to happen with an organization or maybe a state agency, um, such that everyone focuses their attention on that thing. And in terms of how that actually, uh, just one second, are y'all hearing a feedback?
yes.
Who's producing the feedback? Is it me? Let me mute myself real quick.
I don't know.
Can you hear feedback now? Can you hear it from me?
I
No.
think it may be coming from you, Rich.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. Angle this differently.
yeah, maybe so. But I
That's
think the
Is that better? Okay.
yeah. So I think the primary issue here is that you've got the ability to produce content that can cause a reaction for an organization. And one of the things that does is that if you can focus the attention of the organization on one thing, that gives you an in somewhere else, right? So if you can cause a panic for an organization with fake content, then you can go after the organization on some sort of a cyber thing, right? This is a very old concept, in cybersecurity, especially in red teaming, such that there are entire frameworks built out for this. Um, that you create a lot of noise to hide what you're actually doing, right? So one of the things that you do as a red teamer, if you're actually trying to get into an organization, and especially if you're getting into an organization to cause damage or something like that, what you'll do is you will cause stress to the organization such that their attention goes to the stressor, and then you attack something else when their attention is away, right? Um, and so that's something that you can do easily with artificial intelligence now.
Okay, I'm still getting some feedback. I don't know.
So Rich, you might want to mute your mic in the meantime.
Maybe I can't figure it out. But do you think, is there any way for deepfakes to bypass the biometric security, like facial recognition?
Given that most biometrics are three-dimensional, that would be difficult. In terms of maybe facial recognition, probably so. Like but then again, you could do the same thing with video. And so anything that's any sort of a countermeasure for video-based biometric bypass would still be in play with deepfake, unless you're talking about trying to do voice printing, right? In terms of voice printing, that's very different. Like, I think we're at the point now where we're very close to the point where voice printing won't work anymore, right? Because I can produce a model that produces my voice to a level of resolution that, it's going to be as good as I am, right? And I think that's the problem, is that for biometrics in general, if any biometric is essentially video based or is audio based, that's becoming something that you can't use anymore, at least at the highest levels of security. But that, of course, that's one of the reasons why we have something like MFA, right? We use multi-factor, right? And it's called multi-factor, not two-factor anymore. It's called multi-factor because you want to have people think about the fact that the more factors you have, the more secure your authentication will be. But generally it's two things. It's something you have and something that you know, right? And so for most cases, even if you have someone that would be capable of producing a video or an audio of you that would verify who you are, you also want to have at least one other factor, preferably another, where it's that they have that thing. Maybe they have your voice, but they don't have the passphrase, right? Or maybe they have your voice in the passphrase, but they don't have your key card. And the more factors you put in, the more likely you'll be able to make AI sort of meaningless, right? AI makes it easier, but it doesn't get you over the hump of multi-factor if you do multi-factor right. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes. My next question was, how can we protect ourselves, within companies and government? And you answered that with dual authenticate. Well, not dual, now multi-factor.
Yeah, multi-factor. The multi-factor is a huge thing. One of the other things is, at least for the authentication into your core organization, basically anything that you consider to be critical to you as a person, whether that's the company you work for, your primary email address, maybe it's a Google account or something else, any sort of primary social media, that's becoming extremely important to keep a hold on. Anything that really produces anything that's part of your professional identity, personal identity, or especially your family, like the family orbit, all of those things, one, need to be multi-factor. That's you need to have multi-factor on all the things, right? And most companies have that. And almost all of the primary services have some means of providing that for you. Two, you need to have separate passwords, right? And good passwords for all of these things, right? Passwords are sort of considered to be very passé in a lot of ways. Everybody wants to denigrate passwords as a security feature, but ultimately they'll never go away as a primary level of defense, because it is and will always be a very easy to implement method of authentication, right? It'll always be that way. And so for these important services, you want to make sure that you have a unique password in all of them, such that if any one of them goes down, or what's worse, if something that's not one of your primary things, and if you're using a password over here, if that goes down and that gives them one of these important things to you, then you're in trouble, because the likelihood that they'll be able to take this and roll it into, further access into other things is very high. Because your primary things like your email address, your social media, your work email, all these things tend to interrelate at a very, very tight level, in ways that you might not expect. And so if they're able to use something like an Etsy account that you don't really care about, but you happen to use the same password, then they'll be able to get into this other thing and so forth. So having these things, treating these individual logins or identities as sort of sovereign individuals that you have to protect as hard as you can, as well as you can, with multi-factor, good, solid passwords and things like that. That's pretty much what you can do. And in addition to that, cultivate a very high level of professional paranoia. Basically, just if anyone tells you something is so, trust but verify. That's just the way it is.
Skeptical criticism. Oh, I heard the feedback there. I don't know. Anyways, well, thank you. One other thing I wanted to touch on. I feel like we've been talking all about, scary deepfakes. Now, how do you think it could have positive applications with deepfake AI?
The only positive applications of deepfakes that I've ever seen is humor. But other than that, I think some of the primary positive applications would be artistic in nature. Other aspects of deepfake that may, especially when it comes to voice and other things, would be in terms of things like therapy, right? So if there is a way, maybe it's exposure therapy or something where it helps people to deal with loss in their life or anything like that. It's not really a question I've really thought about, because by and large, I see deepfakes as like, oh, that's cool. And then immediately I think, oh, that's awful.
Yes.
So I don't particularly care for it as a type of technology, but I know Hollywood would have lots to do with it, right? They'd have a lot to do with it. But I think that there are positive things. I mean, just in general, the concept of AI as a whole, and this is me sort of putting on my, my computer science nerd hat, is that artificial intelligence, as we understand it currently, is best thought of as a tool. I think it's important to think of artificial intelligence as a tool, and especially as a tool that does a very good job at intelligence amplification and scaling. I do not think that artificial intelligence is a good tool for replacing humans. I think that that's something that people tend to run to that because there are immediate financial consequences for that, both positive or negative, depending on who you are. But I don't think that that's what they're good at. And I think that when we look at artificial intelligence, if we can think of it as something that would help us to dive into the world and the corpus of human experience and knowledge and find new gold inside of that, and to help us to understand who we are and what we think of as important, and find nooks and crannies that we otherwise wouldn't find just left to ourselves, it helps us to do that really well, right? It's very, very good at that. And when it's doing that, as long as we are part of the process as much as we possibly can be, then artificial intelligence will in fact make our lives better. I very firmly believe that, because it it makes sense to me that it would, right? Just like the computer has in its own way when used correctly, or basic manufacturing technology and things like that. A lot of things out there, a lot of these technologies, they have redounded to our benefit because human beings have been involved along the process. Now, they've obviously had bad applications and so forth, but as long as we're part of the process of teaching AI and being part of the development of AI and making sure that we put guardrails on where we use it, how we use it, and how we develop it, then it will be to the benefit of the human species, I think. I kind of went wide on your question. Did I
Oh,
answer it?
yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm done with the deepfake discussion. Trish, did you want to?
You're muted.
Mute.
You're muted, buddy.
There we go.
Awesome. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was adversarial machine learning. So I know you and I have talked in the past about kind of AI and the revolution that it's going to be, and really a lot of people are looking at it as some type of savior for whatever, right? Name your problem, it's going to fix that, right? But we also, in the end, it's a lot of input output, right? It's not as magical as people try to make it out to be. Now, listen, I'm not downgrading how awesome it is. I use Chat GPT every day, so I'm not going to I'm not going to say that it's not an amazing tool, and it really is. But when you talk about AML, that's where it gets scary to me, and that's where I see things where things can go wrong pretty quickly. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, assuming that I have the same idea of what adversarial machine learning is that you do, my definition of it is best exemplified through a particular algorithm, a neural network algorithm called generative adversarial neural network, or generative adversarial network. And that's just an implementation of a deep learning network, or of a neural network architecture, where the best way to think of it is as, or at least the best way I've had it explained to me. I've not built one, but this is something that I've had it explained and it made sense. Is that if you think of it as, you have an art forger, you have somebody who forges art, and you have an art critic, or somebody like at Christie's whose very purpose is to produce or is to spot fakes, right? So you have the forger and you have the person that spots fakes. Well, whenever the person produces a forgery, the person that wants to spot the fakes is going to look at that forgery and say, is this a forgery, right? And they say yes or no, right? Well, what the adversarial neural network does is that you have this forger that's going to it starts off producing something, right? And generally what it produces at the very beginning is garbage, right? It is obviously not a thing, right? And then you have the forger, the spotter looks at that thing and says, that's not a thing, that's fake. And it gets it right. So it gets rewarded. Well, as you're doing that, as this neural network, that's the faker, as it produces things, if it gets spotted, it gets punished. And this changes the way that it gets trained, which is the important word here. These things get trained, right? The way that this thing gets trained is that every now and again, the forger is given something that actually is something. And so it produces that. The spotter looks at that and either says it's a fake or it's not. And if the spotter gets it wrong and says it's a fake when it isn't, it gets punished, right? And the two train each other that way. So they are training each other back and forth. And basically the faker gets better and better and better at producing fakes, and the spotter gets better and better and better at spotting fakes. All right. So let's take that concept, that idea, right, and let's apply it to software, right? Now, if I have something that is able to produce binaries, right, that either are or are not malware. And I have something that is able to look at a binary and determine whether it is or it isn't malware. And I do the same process. And I learn, if I take that thing that's producing malware and I make it better and better at fooling the thing that spots malware, what do I get? I get something that can produce malware that does a thing that I want it to do, that malware at like endpoint detection or response can't see. On the flip side, what do I get? I get something that is better at spotting malware than anything else on the market. So for the same process of producing these two different neural networks, one that produces malware and one that spots malware, on one side, if I'm a company, I can take the thing that produces malware and sell it to NSA as tailored access. I can take the thing that spots malware and sell it as EDR, right? And in the end, what do I get? Well, what you actually get in the end is you have multiple companies doing this, and you end up with an arms race. Everyone is doing that now, and everyone is producing malware that no one can spot, right? So now, suffice to say, what I'm talking about right now, that this is something that's still in research right now. It's a thing, but it's not. And even if it were a thing, it's so expensive that pretty much only the NSA can afford it, right? So,
right. Well, and I think that was really going to come up to our next topic that Cassie was going to kind of bring up, which was AI enhanced malware. I think some of the other, just some of the things that I've read about is exactly what you're talking about. But there's also the idea of feeding these LLMs bad information, right? So the other piece is, maybe once you feed an LLM, it doesn't classify things wrong, right? You know, you can teach it to not use the correct security measures. So you can have almost that opposite effect where you're kind of denigrating its abilities to do what it's supposed to do as well. So, but go ahead.
If there is a feedback loop, or if there is an actuation aspect to, like, if I am within an organization and say there's an LLM that's a chat interface for handling security incidents in some way, let's just say that system has some means of actuation, okay? Meaning that something gets said within the chat context, and therefore some action is taken automatically based upon something that's going over the chat interface, right? Maybe it's something as simple as, I've got a virus on my laptop, and that causes maybe a ticket to be sent to someone in IT such that they check your laptop. Okay, if I can figure out how to manipulate that LLM channel in a way that's unexpected, such that I cause the ticketing system to do something that is not expected, perhaps I could do that in some way that I could actually inject a C2 into the LLM, such that when it goes to the ticketing system, if I know that it's got an exploit, I pop the exploit and get it to call home, right? The general rule with security is that the more complicated you make anything, the more likely it is that thing will be broken and abused. That is a safe rule. If you make something complex, the more complex it is, the more bugs it'll have, the more vulnerable it will be. Full stop. That is well understood computer science. But in terms of things being complicated, that's actually a separate question, right? So you have complex and you have complicated, which are actually two different things.
Well, that's pretty good answer for that. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, it's again, there's these pitfalls when you start using things like AI, and what we're, just like with anything, we learn it over time, right? You know, there's unintended consequences that pop up, but thanks for answering that. Cassie, do you have some more questions?
I don't think so. That it's been a good rapid fire questions. Next.
Okay, I can go over those. It's one of my more
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of my more fun things we get to do with our guest is we'll kind of ask you some rapid fire questions and some follow ups. So the first one is, and I think I know your answer on this. So Cassie, I told you what I thought he would answer, so we'll have to see if I'm right. But Metallica or Fugazi?
Fugazi.
I knew it.
That's not hard.
Yeah. So do you play any instruments?
Yeah, I play a few. I play cello. That's what I started with. I play bass, piano. I at one point in time in my life, I played trombone and baritone and even trumpet. But mostly it's cello and guitar and bass and stuff like that.
Awesome. So I also hear you like mixed martial arts. Can you tell me about that MMA journey?
Oh goodness, yeah. The MMA journey was great. There was a place near my house. It was the Madison, um, the Gracie Gym in Madison. By a guy ran it named of Houston Cottrell, and he's just a great guy. Um, he was he was like a third blah 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 brown belt. He was about to take his black belt course before I left, but I was taken there, and it was great. Um, I enjoyed it. It's something. It's a little bit tougher to be to do like to try to learn how to do mix. Well, we'll just say jujitsu. It's tougher to learn how to do jujitsu when you're a big guy. Like I'm 6'5" and I'm heavier than I probably need to be, but I'm a big guy, right? I'm a very large guy, and it's tough to do jujitsu sometimes when you're that big because it makes it so that people don't want to roll with you. They don't want to practice with you because you're so darn big, right? Um, but I was lucky. I had some guys that there at the gym that they were good guys. They weren't jerks or anything. They were super cool. They were at my level, and they were also big like me. They weren't as tall as I was, but they were built. They were jacked. So it was fine for me. But it's like that's one of those things that you think, oh, it's great. You're big. You can do yeah. But I'm not getting in street fights. I'm trying to learn how to do this, right? So it's nice to. It was
Yeah, I
it was
know
a
you.
lot of fun though.
You and I've had some good conversations about that. Yeah, I was about to say I always found that the tall guys always had an advantage, like a leverage advantage, but
Well, they do.
and it's so I get not wanting to have to roll with some guys that are a lot bigger than you, but I think and this is what I tell people, like, so my son, he's interested in coding and stuff. And he's just like, I want to stay. I'm like, son, no, you got to get out. And we're forcing him to do sports. And I think that he wants to do jujitsu. So we're looking at maybe having him do that. Also
You'll
having
have
him do
wrestling.
boxing. What's that?
You'll have wrestling in Arkansas.
Yeah, they've got wrestling here.
Okay.
Which I never did wrestling, but when I did jujitsu, we had a couple of guys who came in who had wrestling backgrounds. Boy, they were just good.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well,
I mean, the thing
they were
with
so far
wrestling,
ahead of the curve.
oh yeah, yeah. The wrestling guys are always really good, but it's just that wrestling they have them in the school, right? So if you got it in the school, then you do it that way. But I mean, it's like in Mississippi, we didn't have wrestling. There was no wrestling back in Mississippi, but in Alabama,
Right.
it's a huge thing, right?
Yep.
They've got wrestling.
I think it's
every
bigger
school.
now. It's a lot bigger than when you and I were coming up.
Oh, it wasn't there when I was. It was still not there, but I mean, it was not a thing. Now it's a thing because of MMA, right? UFC and everything.
Yeah, it's a big thing now, and I think like WWE and stuff's making a comeback. Boy, they seem to be pretty popular nowadays too. Like,
Well, they're
that's
getting
the
a lot
real-
fancier. That's for darn sure. Things have changed a lot since like the old junkyard dog and Jake the Snake.
Yeah,
Things were pretty simple back then.
yeah. The theatrics are a little more high dollar for sure.
Oh yeah.
So, one of the things that Cassie and I were always talking about, like, man, he is so well read in like just your vocabulary. I'm like, half the time that I'm on a call with you, I'm just like, man, I need to Google like 3/4 of these words. So I know you're well read scholastically, and you have to be to have your PhD and what you've got. But the real question is, what's your guilty pleasure reads? What's your go-to when you're like, man, I just want to flip off my
I
brain
know.
and
Well,
have something
it's
fun?
so not interesting. It's the standard. It's like fantasy and sci-fi. It's that I just I love that. When I was a lot younger, I would, in my 20s, trying to find myself there. I'd read a lot more of the fancy stuff, and I still love some of it. Um, the Dostoevskys and Tolstoys and stuff. I still appreciate it and do love that. But I mean, if I got a spare minute, I'm reading like, you know, Brandon Sanderson, or I'm reading like Larry Correa or Monster Hunter International. Like I'm just having a good time.
Well, I appreciate the time, David. Cassie, do you have anything else you wanted to ask David since we got him here?
I don't think so. I really appreciate your time today and going
You
over
bet.
cybersecurity threats with AI. It is a topic of discussion nowadays. So thank you so much.
You
I
bet.
learned a lot today for sure. For sure.
Yeah, I think
I'm sure
everybody
our listeners did too.
Yep. And if you have any advice, you want to give to our listeners, what would be the one thing they could do to best protect themselves?
That's easy. The number one thing is get multi-factor on everything you think is important. Get multi-factor enabled on your email, multi-factor on your social media, especially if you're on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. Um, and the other thing that I would say is that get to know a password manager, right? Start learning how to use a password manager, right? That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good piece of advice. And not only just professionally, but you can get password managers for your whole family. I think that's good to help
And
protect your family as well. So, well,
Um,
thank you
I
again for coming by. Oh, go ahead, Cassie. Sorry.
Well, I have heard, like personally, you're always thinking about your family. I've heard that nowadays people are using like code words, like within the family.
Mhm.
Since I think you even said that, David, that like someone impersonated a mother calling their son for
yeah,
money or something like
yes,
that.
that's a
Um,
really good point. That's a really good point. So that's one of the things that, going back to the deep faking the audio, having code words in your family to verify, that is perfect. That's exactly what a multi-factor is, right? And
mhm,
but in this case, it's like code words from the military, right? It's
right,
something that only your family would know,
right,
or it could be something as simple as a question, right? That only you guys would know, that somebody who is faking a voice won't know. And it could be like an inside joke. You could just make an inside joke if they're trying to say, hey, can you do this, that, or the other? Make one of the inside jokes that you have in your family to see how they respond to it. And if they balk, or if they don't respond right, or it sounds weird, hang up. They're obviously trying to fake you, right? So,
right.
but having an explicit code word is even better. That's primo. That's a great idea. Thank you, Cassie.
It's on top of my list, with my parents and
Yes.
even like, you know, your children when they get in the 15 to 20-year old. I
Mhm.
would think you don't talk to them as like you do your younger children. And how about if they called you and say, hey dad, I need so and so.
Mhm.
um it'd be good to have that code word. Are you
Yeah.
sure?
Our code word is, "Hey, Dad, can I have some money?" And I'm like, I mean, sure. No. When they get older, that's what they ask for more and more. But
That's right.
Mhm.
well, thank you again, David, and thanks again to my co-host Cassie. These things are so much fun, and I appreciate all the time. We'll probably be doing some more cybersecurity related discussions, and we've got some other guests that I think are going to be pretty fun to talk with. And David, maybe you can kind of join us and kind of co-host some of those
Sure.
security discussions with some of these other guests we have. But until next time, I appreciate you.
You bet. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning into the NSI podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share. For more information, visit us at nextstepinnovation.com.